with the extremist left. The United States Congress needs to make an informed decision, and that starts with this objection. I yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Florida,
Madam Speaker, I rise as well to support the objection, and I rise with a simple question. Can the chair honestly tell Americans that with pending Supreme Court legislation or pending Supreme Court case over legal observers not being allowed to observe and inspect signatures, that the laws and Constitution of that state were not violated to change voting outcomes? Madam Speaker, I will wait for a response.
Has 25 seconds remaining.
I will repeat my question. Can you honestly tell Americans that with pending Supreme Court case over legal observers not being able to observe and inspect signatures, that the laws and Constitution of Arizona did not be violated to change voting outcomes? And I will wait for a response.
Okay. Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the objection.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, today is an important day. In 1862, during the depths of the Civil War, President Lincoln submitted his annual message to Congress, to this body. And in it, he wrote the following: "Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. We of this Congress and this administration will be remembered in spite of ourselves. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth." We gather today, Madam Speaker, to ensure the survival of our grand American experiment, the greatest democracy this world has ever known. And there are millions of people watching today's proceedings. The eyes of the world are on us now, my colleagues, wondering if we will keep the faith, wondering if our constitutional republic will hold. Will we adhere to our Constitution, that solemn, visionary document that has guided us so well for so long and enabled the peaceful transfer of power for the last 230 years? Will we continue to be a country premised on the consent of the governed, a Congress that respects the will of the people, and a republic that will endure? Those are the questions before us today, Madam Speaker. With respect to my new colleague from Colorado, the question is not whether Joe Biden was elected the 46th President of the United States. He clearly was. The people of Arizona, like so much of the country, spoke clearly and resoundingly. They voted in record numbers, and over 81 million Americans selected Joe Biden as the next president. Now, today we hear from some in this chamber, not all, but some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, vague claims of fraud. No substance, no evidence, no facts, no explanation for why over 88 judges across this land have rejected the very same claims. Madam Speaker, the bottom line is this.
Judges are corrupt.
As my colleague Representative Raskin so eloquently put it, the people have spoken. And that is why on December 14th, the Electoral College met to certify the election of a duly elected president, just as they've done for centuries. During terrible world wars, recessions, depressions, plagues, and pandemics, they met their duty, and they once again rose to the occasion and certified the election. And the question now is, will we do ours? Now, I know there are many textualists among us, many of my colleagues, who would understand that the Constitution must guide our work today. And the Constitution is crystal clear. Our duty today is a narrow one. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 3 reads, "The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and the House, Open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes shall be the president. That's it. Period. Our job is not to replace the judgment made by the American people with our own. And yet that is precisely what so many of my House and Senate Republican colleagues ask this body to do, to substitute their judgment for the expressed will of the American people. In America, we don't do that. In the United States, we accept the results of free and fair elections. We don't ignore the will of the voters, Madam Speaker, and attempt to install a preferred candidate into power. That doesn't happen here. I will close with this. Our duty, our task, is a very simple one: to honor the voice of the people, to honor our Constitution, to count the votes, certify this election, and begin to heal this great country of ours. I pray each of us may find the courage to do so. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman? Okay. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the objection.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, we have a solemn responsibility today. We must vote to sustain objections to states of electors submitted by states that we genuinely believe clearly violated the Constitution in the presidential election of 2020. This is the threshold legal question before us, and it's an issue before us for the state of Arizona. We got to repeat this for emphasis because a lot of people seem to be confused. Because judges and not the state legislature changed the rules of the election, Arizona clearly violated the plain language of Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution in its selection of presidential electors. The framers of our Constitution recognized that elections were susceptible to corruption. We all know that. So how did they fix it? How did they provide for that? They created the Electoral College as a safeguard, and they expressly empowered state legislatures to ensure the integrity of our unique election system. Only the state legislatures, because they're a full body of representatives and not rogue officials, were given the authority to direct the manner of appointing presidential electors because it was so important. The Supreme Court has acknowledged this over and over. They previously affirmed in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, quote, "The appointment of these electors is thus placed absolutely and wholly with the legislatures of the several states. That authority can never be taken away or abdicated." The Arizona legislature did enact detailed rules and procedures that state was determined and was supposed to follow to choose its electors. But in the months preceding the 2020 election, as we've heard, and by the way, 1,000 pages of evidence have just been submitted on the facts on this, those well-established rules and procedures were deliberately changed. They weren't changed by the legislature, friends. They were changed by judges. And those actions taken by the judiciary were not limited to mere interpretations of existing law. No, they were substantive, wholesale changes to those statutes. That's a usurpation of the authority that the legislature had. That usurpation was repeated across the country this year. It's the primary reason. It's one of the reasons why the election of 2020 became riddled with an unprecedented number of serious allegations of fraud and irregularities all over the country. National polls, as has been said, indicate that a huge percentage of Americans now have serious doubts about not just the outcome of this presidential contest, but also the future reliability of our election system itself. Since we are convinced that the election laws in Arizona and some other key states were changed in this unconstitutional manner, we have a responsibility today. The slates of electors produced under those modified laws are thus unconstitutional. They are, quote, not regularly given or lawfully certified as required by the Electoral Count Act, and they're invalid on their face. That's just the conclusion that you have to reach. Given these inescapable facts, we believe we have no choice today but to vote to sustain objections to those slates of electors. Mr. Raskin and others today have cited the 12th Amendment, and they cite Article 2, Section 1, Clause 3. Remember that, Clause 3, and they've asserted that Congress has only one narrow role today. We're just supposed to count the electoral votes that have been submitted. But those advocates have overlooked a critical first principle. Their assertion is only true so long as Congress first is convinced that the electoral votes that are produced by a process that violated the Constitution is there. We got to get through Clause 2 of Article 2, Section 1 before we get to Clause 3 is the point. Look, in our unique system, Congress is positioned as the last bulwark in a presidential election to ensure the Constitution has been followed. Indeed, in just two decades ago, the Supreme Court spoke to this. They plainly acknowledged this important deliberative role of Congress. It was the famous Bush v. Gore litigation that everybody remembers from 2000. In a per curiam opinion, meaning all 9 justices, it was unanimous. They noted strict adherence to the provisions of the Electoral Count Act may, quote, create a safe harbor for a state insofar as congressional consideration of its electoral votes is concerned. However, they said, unanimously, the court said, since Title III, Section 5 contains a principle of federal law that would assure